Well, hello, guys, and welcome into a special edition of this ABC10 Sports Talk on the Sacramento Kings. I'm Kevin John, joined by Matt George here. And even though the Sacramento Kings season came to an end a few weeks ago, there's still a lot to talk about.
Whole lot.
Yeah, from the season that was, and then, of course, looking into the future. So as we look back on this season, I think it's only right that we highlight some of the most incredible moments of this season, at least according to Matt George and myself, and then just kind of compare and contrast to last season. So, Matt, I'm going to start off with you here. Obviously, there's a lot to take away from this season, even though they didn't make the playoffs, but there were some bright moments. When you look back on this season, what are a couple of moments that really stand out to you more than anything else?
Well, that's what's strange is because the way this season ended, it was a letdown and the Kings ultimately missed the playoffs.
Yeah.
But this was a good season, and I think that was a common theme that we heard from the Sacramento Kings in their end-of-season press conferences. This was a good team. They won 46 games, well above 500. Unfortunately, they missed the playoffs because of how difficult the West was. So there were a lot of good moments for the Sacramento Kings this year. Two that come to mind instantly. The first one is the 47-point night for Keegan Murray. He hit 12 three-pointers here in Sacramento against the Utah Jazz. Now, in the grand scheme of things, Keegan Murray offensively, I don't think had the year and the offensive leap that we were hoping for. We came into the season, even Kings general manager Monty McNair said in an interview that the Kings were expecting a big leap from Keegan, that they needed Keegan to kind of develop himself and appear as more of a go-to offensive option for Sacramento. He still isn't quite there yet. He scored a lot of his baskets from the perimeter. He still owns the record for most three-pointers made as a rookie. He got that last season. And that night was a reminder of, hey, man, when this guy gets hot from three-point range, he gets scorching hot. But a good part of that night was that Keegan showed he was capable of being a guy that you can put all your eggs in that basket offensively. And from start to finish of a game, he can lead you through, and he can be that guy. And again, he's only in year two, or he just wrapped up year two. So he's got so much time to build upon that performance. He also grew exponentially as a defender. So obviously the future very, very bright for Keegan Murray. And that was a fun explosion type moment where Kings fans went, oh, wow. I mean, we knew this guy was good, but wow, this guy is good.
And just, you know, it's funny you mentioned that. Obviously, Matt, you were inside the arena during that third quarter when it seems like Keegan could not miss. Yeah. It was like he was on the beach and just throwing stuff into the ocean because everything was going in. And I just remember how electrifying that Golden One was. I remember watching it here, and I can only imagine inside the arena just how loud and, you know, just boisterous it was inside of there when he was doing that. And you mentioned a good thing. I was one of those people like Monty McNair who was looking forward to Keegan taking that next step this year and being maybe the third leading scorer behind Fox and Sabonis. And we saw it during the Cali Classic. This past season, he averaged 40 points, I believe, or he had 38 the first game, 40 the second game, or something like that.
I watched that game on a cruise ship. So you were there for that one. I watched that one on a cruise ship, and that was kind of a welcome to the NBA moment for him, too, even though he was just in year two.
Exactly. So going off of that, you know, the Cali Classic, you're like, okay, Keegan's going to have a huge impact this year. And even though he kind of underwhelmed in that aspect, still to see him have that night, Matt, I think a lot of Kings fans would agree that was just one of the most significant points of the season for him.
And what's crazy, too, is it speaks to how dangerous of a team the Sacramento Kings are because Keegan Murray got that hot in the third quarter, and all 17,000 eyes of fans inside the Golden One Center were on Keegan Murray. But he still was getting wide open three after wide open three. That's not because the Utah Jazz just suddenly forgot how to play defense. It's because the Kings have so many weapons. He's out there on the floor with De'Aaron Fox, with Malik Monk, with Domantas Sabonis, that the Utah Jazz had to pay so much attention to those other guys that even though Keegan Murray was having the night of his life, he was still getting open looks. That's just how dynamic this Kings team is when offensively they're playing the right way. That's something as a team they got away from a little bit too much this year that I hope they get back to next year.
Good point. Well, Matt, before I ask you your other moment that you really liked back in the season, I'm going to share a moment as well. Now, this particular one was something that gradually happened throughout the season and culminated on a particular night. And, of course, I'm talking about Domantas Sabonis when he achieved the double-double streak as far as consecutive games with the double-double, leading, or shall I say, taking the record from Kevin Love, who had it some 10-plus years ago. And the reason why this was such a just significant moment for the Kings and just for the game of basketball. If you look at what Domas had been doing throughout the season leading up to that, he was doing things that we've only seen like Wilt Chamberlain and some of the greats do as far as triple-doubles, double-doubles, the way he was getting his double-doubles too. 20 rebounds this game, 20 points, 10 assists. It was the way that he was doing it. And whenever you're being compared to the late, great Wilt Chamberlain, I'd say you're entering uncharted territory. So with that being said, when he did achieve his 54th consecutive double-double, it was a great moment inside of Golden One Center. They obviously stopped and they played a video montage to pay homage to him.
Right.
And even though, when it comes to individual records, players will always say, well, I'm not here to chase individual records. I'm here. It's a team sport. I'm here to play. As a team, we're here to do much more things than individual records. But you can't help but think that this did mean a lot to Domantas Sabonis and just the Kings organization as a whole in order to establish that new record. And Domas ended up with 77 double-doubles on the season, which means he got a double-double in every game but 5 the whole season, which is insane. Not to mention, he also led the league in triple-doubles. And, Matt, I just feel that Domantas Sabonis is someone who does not and maybe will never get the respect and reverence that he deserves in the NBA. And I get it. A lot of that is because of lack of postseason success. And a lot of times, pundits, people will look at what you do in the postseason when they really look at your overall impact and how that they evaluate you as a player. And I understand Domas has not done enough or a lot in the postseason. But when you look at what this guy does consistently, regularly, I remember De'Aaron Fox, I remember Mike Brown, all said throughout the season, it's hard just not to take for granted somebody who does this night in and night out, because at this point, it's almost expected that Domas is going to put up a double-double or even a triple-double in some cases and do just a lot of things to get everybody involved. And I just feel that that record itself is great for Domas, but just what Domas has meant to this team throughout the whole season and his ability to affect the game in so many different ways definitely deserves praise.
Not only putting up numbers that only has been done by Wilt Chamberlain before, but he's doing it in an era in the NBA where guards and wings are the focus, not bigs. Like, it's gone away from the traditional big man. Now, Domantas Sabonis isn't necessarily a post player big like Shaquille O'Neal was back in the day necessarily, but Domantas Sabonis is a big in a guards league. And he's putting up the numbers that he's putting up. To me, that's even more impressive. However, not impressive enough for him to be named an NBA All-Star for some reason, even though Anthony Davis was named an NBA All-Star over Domas. And I understand Anthony Davis's Hall of Fame career and pedigree, but Anthony Davis also has never beaten Domantas Sabonis in a game, period, at all in his entire career. And we saw what Domas did to Anthony Davis this season, especially in the Golden One Center. It wasn't even a battle. There was dad and there was son, if you know what I'm talking about. But look, Domantas Sabonis, we do take him for granted because you just pencil in a double-double every night that he plays. What the Sacramento Kings team as a whole need to do, and Domas is a part of this, he's not excused from this, but what the Kings need to do as a whole is do a better job of taking advantage of big games like that, because there were far too many nights where Domas had a triple-double in a loss. Like, that's inexcusable to me. Now, Domas could have done more, especially on the scoring end, and that's where I think a lot of Kings players, but Domas especially, they're going to be asked more from as a scorer. And I think with the Kings' offensive drop-off, like we talked about a little bit, it's not that the Kings need to suddenly go out this summer and get a whole bunch of new offensive players. They're trying to add defensive depth, which is one of the areas of growth for this year. They need to just get more offensive consistency and higher scoring games out of their top guys, Domantas Sabonis, of course, being one of them.
Well, yeah, and then obviously it's always hard to replicate that amount of offensive success you had last year. Last year you had a historically great offensive season when it comes to efficiency, also as far as their points per game and everything. And we know that obviously you're not going to duplicate that every season. And it was nice to see the Kings step up defensively this year, especially later in the season. They went on a streak, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was like 8 or 10 straight games where they held their opponent under 105 or 110, 105 points per game down that stretch. And I mean, that's phenomenal, especially in a league where you see any given night 130 points that is scored, or even higher. So to see their defensive grit come about, especially this late in the season, was remarkable to watch. And if you've been paying attention to the playoffs this year, you see a lot of these games are won on the defensive end. You're not seeing a whole lot of shootouts this year in the NBA playoffs. So defensively, we all know it's an old cliche, offense sells tickets, defense wins championships, but you see when you look into the postseason how critical defense is. And just getting back to your point, I do agree. I mean, the offense can be opened up and spread out a whole lot more for this Kings team, but defensively they were great. All right, Matt, with that being said, I know you had another moment this season that stood out to you, and I think it's kind of going to the dad-baby rocking thing with two rivals in Northern California, but go ahead.
Well, I'll keep it short, but it's definitely sweet. The Sacramento Kings, in my opinion, ending the Golden State Warriors dynasty. Now, ultimately, it didn't amount to anything. It was the first of two play-in games that the Kings had to win. We know they lost the second one in New Orleans. That's why they missed the playoffs. But to get a chance to get revenge in a one-game playoff, essentially a repeat of Game 7 last year where Steph Curry scored 50 points and the Sacramento Kings were eliminated at the hands of the Golden State Warriors, who have been big brother to the Kings' little brother for a while, and rightfully so here in Northern California. The Kings, they get this matchup that, I'll be honest with you, I was terrified of. And we saw this matchup coming from miles away. Kev, you and I were talking about it months before it actually happened. Watch the Kings and the Warriors meet again in a one-game playoff. And I think that should have terrified Kings fans. Thankfully, it didn't terrify the Kings. They knew they were the better team. They played like it. They dominated the Warriors on that given night. I'm not saying that the Warriors are going to implode this summer. We have no idea what they're going to do. But
they're going to implode.
There's questions about Klay Thompson's future. There's questions about Draymond Green. Steph Curry still has more in the tank, but how much of this prime or how many of these Steph Curry years do you have left, and how much do you want to waste it? Like, that night might have been the last night that we've seen the Warriors dynasty as we know it, and it ended with a loss to the Kings. That feels good to say.
It definitely feels good, especially for all the Sacramento Kings fans. And also, it's interesting you talked about that dynasty coming to an end. Klay Thompson had all of 0 points in that final game. So obviously, Klay probably doesn't want that to be his last game with the Golden State Warriors. But as we head into free agency, of course, there's going to be teams out there that are looking for a veteran 3-and-D guard that Klay Thompson is, that may actually go after him and offer him more money, et cetera, et cetera. So, Matt, I do agree. And this was the one thing I was not looking forward to, is a single game elimination a situation where they would have to take on the Golden State Warriors, because we all saw what happened in Game 7 of last year. Matt, the Kings didn't just avenge that Game 7 loss from last year. They put the smackdown on the Warriors this year. And like you said, could have effectively, as we know it, ended the dynasty. So I 100% agree with you. And before we get out of here, Matt, one other thing that I was going to say, my other top moment of this year, piggybacking off of that, was actually the play-in tournament game between the Kings and the Warriors at Golden One Center. And a guy by the name of Malik Monk, who, by the way, should have won Sixth Man of the Year.
100%.
No disrespect to Nas Reed, but...
No disrespect. He does not deserve to win.
I digress, even though one of them was like a starter the last 10 games. But anyway, I digress. So back to it. The reason why it was so great is not only Malik Monk, obviously, for all of you that saw it, he hit the game-winning shot with like 6 seconds left in regulation to go on and win that game. But... another reason why I really wanted to point that out is just because of what Malik Monk has meant to this Kings team. Specifically, I mean, obviously, both years he was here, but specifically this season, what he has been off the bench to that team, leading that second unit, being the best sixth man in the league, and being able to really carry an offensive output that really only De'Aaron Fox can do with this team, as far as creating your own shot, penetrating to the basket, shooting the three ball very well, and basically spreading the floor like no other. I think that just Malik Monk's overall significance and value to this team was seen throughout this last year. And as we were talking about offseason and stuff like that, I think that's the big question mark surrounding the Kings organization right now. What is Malik Monk going to do? Are the Orlando Magic going to try and pry him away? Or is another team going to try and pry him away? I mean, you just don't know. And Malik means so much to this team. He's the heart and soul of that second unit. I know he wants to start, Matt, and he deserves to start. But, you know, have we seen the rest of him or the end of him in a Kings uniform?
Well, he's not just the heart and soul of the second unit. He's the heart and soul of the team. And like they'll acknowledge that. He's just as important off the floor as he is on the floor. On the floor, he absolutely was the sixth man of the year. Second, sometimes, or often third, sometimes even second best player on this roster when the Kings needed it. A go-to guy, and when De'Aaron Fox was out, he was crucial in those games where De'Aaron Fox is an impossible player to replicate or replace. Malik Monk is one of the closest in the league that could possibly do what De'Aaron Fox did. And he brought that with the Sacramento Kings this year. His future is definitely uncertain. If the Sacramento Kings lose him, that is a massive hole for them to fill, both in the locker room and on the floor, which I think would be no short of a catastrophe. And I'll say this too. We can see how important Malik is to this team by how the season ended without Malik, right? They had a really, really tough schedule and stretch of games. So I'm not saying that it should have been easy for the Kings. But Malik being out and the Kings having their worst stretch to end the season and ultimately drops them from a guaranteed playoff spot to a play-in spot, and then they miss the playoffs, that's not a coincidence. I've been on record saying, and I still feel that way, I think the Sacramento Kings would still be playing basketball right now if Malik Monk doesn't get hurt. So we have no idea what the future is going to hold for Sacramento. We know very clearly from the comments of Monte McNair and Mike Brown that and the players, of course,
they want him.
They desperately want him back, but money talks, right? And Malik has had such a unique career journey to where he was almost out of the league in Charlotte, kind of revived his career a little bit in LA, came to Sacramento, being paid pennies on the dollar for what he should be making, and turned into this outstanding player who now deserves to have teams in a bidding war for him. So is he chasing the money? Is he going to stay in Sacramento where for the city and the fans that he's acknowledged how much their love means to him? Is he going to stay with his best friend in De'Aaron Fox and a head coach in Mike Brown that he loves to play for? It's a tough decision for Malik, but we can be disappointed if the decision is for him to leave. We can't really hold it against him, though, because we know he's doing what's best for him.
Absolutely, and it's interesting that you said they would still be playing basketball. I believe Malik Monk said in his exit interview, or the final press conference of the season a couple of weeks ago, that he said, we would still be playing if I were healthy. So 100%. I think a lot of people know that. Now, Matt, as we wrap this up real quick, just one thing I want to compare it to. Obviously, last season was last season. Not the season that just wrapped up, but a year ago.
Yep.
Obviously, the Kings ending that playoff drought, going 7 games with the defending champions at the time in the Golden State Warriors. Obviously, this season not making the playoffs at all, making the play-in, and obviously being eliminated from the New Orleans Pelicans. But when you look back on this season, Matt, compared to last season, I think we could both agree there's not as much optimism or just overall joy going into the postseason like there was last year. And I think it is safe to say that the Kings did maybe take a small step back this year. But another thing you got to realize, Matt, the West got a whole lot better. You mentioned the 46 wins the Kings got. Last year, that would have been a playoff, with 46 wins, because they won 48 last year, were a 3rd seed. This year, 46 was not good enough. So, there's a lot of questions going into this offseason.
Yeah, but nobody feels bad for you about playing in the Western Conference. That's the state of it. That's the way it is. If you don't like it, then get the heck out type thing situation, right? And the Kings know. Monte McNair said it himself in his end-of-season press conference. This team is built to win right now. So obviously they have work to do. Trying to bring Malik Monk back, that's job number 1. But in addition to that, this Kings team needs help. I think what we learned this year is that they couldn't just run everything back and expect the same result, right?
Exactly.
This year is a context year. Last year was all vibes, right? Hey, the dawn of the beam. The Kings are relevant again. Playoffs back in Sacramento. What a fun ride. Everybody just enjoy it. No matter what happens, it's been a successful, fun year. This past season that just wrapped up was oh, wait, we're good now. But like Mike Brown has said, it is really freaking hard to get to great. And last year was this season that just wrapped up was a good example of that. The Kings made tremendous progress in certain areas, especially on the defensive end. Mike Brown would probably tell you that he's happier with how the Kings are playing basketball to end this season, even missing the playoffs, than he was last season when the Kings were making the playoffs. He thinks it's more sustainable. But clearly, over the course of this season, you saw what holes your roster has, in addition to how well the talent is around you. You got to compete, and you got to dip into the pocketbook. You also have to be competitive in the trade market, in free agency, and in the draft to do so. So, ball's in Monte McNair's court, and now we all sit back. We wish we were watching Kings basketball right now.
Oh, yes.
We're going to sit back and watch what is going to be a very volatile summer for the Sacramento Kings. They have to get this summer right, because the Western Conference is not going to sit around and wait for them.
Absolutely. So I think Monty and Mike Brown are not going to be somewhere in Cancun hanging out this summer. I think they're going to be working nonstop to make sure that this roster gets to where they want it to be so they could be playing basketball at this time next year. Well, guys, obviously, no Kings basketball right now, and once the season ends, there's no Kings basketball until, October? Ugh. But if you need something to get you through the summer and through all, everyone who's going into basketball withdrawals, the Locked On podcast by Matt George be sure to listen to it on ABC10 Plus. You can find it on YouTube or on ABC10.com. Matt will fulfill your Sacramento Kings basketball fixes throughout the whole offseason, heading into the NBA draft, which is coming up next month, and then so on throughout the rest of the offseason. So thank you guys for watching this. Remember, you can see more Kings content and sports content on ABC10.com, and of course, Toyota Sports Extra every Sunday night at 11:35. In the meantime, he is Matt George. I am Kevin John. We will see you soon.